Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. And to those joining us remotely on YouTube, we have quite the setup here in the back. This feels very official and professional, but we have folks joining us live as well. So thanks everyone for being here. I'm Robyn Wilson. I'm the Acting Associate Director in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I am very much a last-minute fill-in for our interim director, Tim Hobb, who got pulled away unexpectedly. But I feel very well prepared. Joe does an excellent job with these events, and I have a very detailed script of things that I need to say. So I'm going to do my best to cover all the important points, from some housekeeping and logistics to kind of an overview of what we're doing tonight. So tonight, we've convened a handful of individual leaders in the fight to protect the eastern hemlock from the elongate hemlock scale and the hemlock woolly adelgid. We're not able to feature experts and representatives from all of the critical groups in tonight's lineup, but we've got their logos here on the screen. And we hope that you're able to take note of all of these critical entities, and we're fortunate to have some of them here tonight to share with us later. For those here in the room, I hope that you're able to come early enough and enjoy the poster presentations out in the hallway prior to the event. These are our school's seniors and they're presenting about their semester-long capstone projects. The students that are presenting tonight were enrolled in courses instructed by, I'm trying to see if any of them are in here, Esther DeBusk, Greg Heitzhusen, and Tim Jockey, excellent faculty in our school and at OSU. Their projects were conducted in collaboration with dozens of regional environmental organizations, local governments, and businesses with a sustainability focus. And for those watching online, you can learn more about these projects, since you weren't able to be here in person, about the students and their clients at the link that's provided at our program's registration website, or at the link that I think will be dropped in the chat momentarily by Molly. Thank you, Molly. I do want to take a minute, though, and recognize individuals who have been involved in those capstone projects this fall. So if you are a professional in the audience who has supported a capstone project this year or served as a client organization, could you stand up and do a little friendly wave? And it doesn't even have to be one that's featured here tonight. But if you've been involved in that, yay, thank you. Thank you to those who are here in person, and also to those who might be online who have partnered with us in these efforts at the school. I know it sounds noisy out there still, so I think a lot of the students are still out there, but do we have any students in the room who presented this evening? Capstone students? They're still doing their thing. Yeah, I was gonna say, they haven't made it in yet. Hopefully some of them will filter in. But we appreciate them taking the time to be here tonight. This is the end of the semester, and exams are coming up, and so they've got a lot on their plates right now. So couple kind of housekeeping logistic things. You might have figured some of this out already, but to be mindful of our material waste output, we printed enough brochures so that the tables can share those. So you have those on your table. There's also a QR code. So if you want to scan that, it'll bring up a digital brochure if you want to have your own or save that for future reference. The brochures on the table and at the QR code contain today's agenda and information about each of our speakers, including their bios. So you can get a little more detailed background about those who are joining us tonight. If you're on YouTube, Molly, again, will place a link to the brochure in the chat. Also, for those on YouTube, please feel free to use the chat feature. If you have questions or comments, that'll be monitored throughout the program. And the team will be reviewing those questions, and we'll take questions both from the online and the in-person audience after 7:10 tonight, when we wrap up some of the comments from our panelists. Our program brochure lists the individuals who chose to sponsor a student for today's EPN activities. So again, thanks to those sponsors, if some of you are in the room, who help make these programs affordable and accessible to our students each month. With the food, it's not cheap, as you can imagine, at a university to do these things, and so it's nice to have that support for our students to be here. This might be, I won't say the most exciting things, I'm sure the speakers will be the most exciting thing, but you'll notice you have poinsettias on your table. These were purchased by the Environmental Professionals Network last week from Ohio State's Pi Alpha Xi chapter. This is a National Honor Society for undergraduate and graduate students in floriculture and horticulture. And their annual poinsettia sale funds educational field trips and professional development trainings for students. Over 1,000 poinsettias and hundreds of other holiday plants are featured in their sale, and we were very happy to help support that cause today. So the exciting part is that someone gets to take home the poinsettia that's on the table. You cannot just grab it and run at the end, or grab it now, but if you reach under your chair, I think on the right side, Joe, you will know if you're a winner. So if you find a Post-it note under the right side of your chair, watching as people search, some excited clapping, some excited dancing. So if you found the yellow sticky notes, you are the proud owner of one of the poinsettias at the table. So feel free to take that with you. And if a table realizes no one has a Post-it note, I guess then you can fight for it at the end. You'll have to figure that out if the notes fell off. But thank you to the Honor Society for that. Okay, a couple other quick housekeeping things. You'll notice these stations over here at the door. So after 7 years of trying to host an official zero waste event in this venue specifically, last month the EPN teamed up with Ohio State's Office of Student Life and Dining Services to offer zero waste toolkits, featuring the reusable plates, bowls, cups, and cutlery that you are using now or did use previously. So apparently there was a debate as to whether the color is orange, red, or scarlet. We're gonna go scarlet since this is OSU. So in the spirit of that, these reusable items, to help limit our collective material footprint, you can return them so that all the pieces are accounted for. You scrape off the food at the compost bin, and then return all the scarlet colored dining materials to the bins near the exits. And you can just do this when the program ends around 7:30. Apparently, the Environmental Professionals Network will be charged for each piece that doesn't get returned. So we don't want to have to go back to our organizers and say that they've lost some of their budget moving forward based on that. So do your best to try to return those if you can. All right, I think that might be the end of the housekeeping. Yeah, so moving on to today's program. At our December program, exactly a year ago, Division of Forestry Chief Dan Balzer approached the EPN team on his way out the door about a topic related to one of our state's most charismatic, important, and threatened evergreen trees, the eastern hemlock. So I think you all know that that is the topic tonight. It so happens that we love hemlocks here in SENR, and with a great partner in the Division of Forestry, the planning for what is tonight's program was well underway a year ago. So we want to thank Chief Balzer, who was unable to participate tonight due to some last-minute changes, but for working with our team to organize and host this event. We're grateful to Stephanie Downs, sitting here in the front, for filling in. She's the Division's Southern Region Service Forestry Coordinator and NRCS Liaison, stepping in for him tonight. Again, bios for each of tonight's speakers, including Stephanie, are in your brochure. And the individuals who will follow Stephanie and I at the podium are all doing really exceptional work to conserve and promote the flourishing of one of our region's great trees and their critical habitats. And Joe kind of joked and said, if I want to insert a little anecdote about my relationship with hemlocks, I can, so I'm going to. I'm a social scientist in the school, but I am also a literal tree hugger. I have pictures hugging redwoods. I have pictures hugging spruce in Sweden. This is a thing that I do. And when I bought the house that we live in about 11 years ago, I was gifted with my house with 3 beautiful hemlocks in my backyard, growing under the shade of some giant maple trees who are sadly probably a little near the end of their life. And I love them. They're right off my patio. They're one of my favorite things about the landscaping at our house. And sadly, probably a month after we moved into our house, we had a straight line wind event. One of my maple trees split in half and took out a hemlock on its way down. It was very devastating. It was like one of the few times I've had a very emotional reaction to something like that happening and feeling this great loss of one of my 3 hemlocks. So I was joking with my table that I still, when I go outside, I often look at the 2 that are left and I worry about them a little bit. So I'm thinking about, is a tree gonna fall on them again? Are they doing okay? Are they too hot? Is the shade all right? So I think about hemlocks almost more than probably any other tree, which is kind of funny that, I think Joe thought, well, you might have something to say, but turns out I do. So again, just thank you all for being part of tonight's event. We really appreciate you being here in person and online, and I will hand it off to Stephanie to move us along.
All right, good evening, everyone. So like Robyn said, I am a fill-in tonight for Dan Balzer, who sends his regards and his regrets that he could not make it tonight. So instead, you get to hear me give an introduction for eastern hemlock and the conservation work that's being done across the state to protect this important species. So first of all, why do we care at the Division of Forestry? I mean, besides the fact that trees are cool, Our mission at the Division of Forestry is to promote and apply management for the sustainable use and protection of Ohio's private and public forests. All forests. That includes our eastern hemlocks. So we are working to actively manage, to protect and save this species and ecosystem across the state as part of our mission. Our vision is healthy forests that are diverse for now and forever, and that people realize the benefits that they provide. What better way to do that than protect one of these dynamic, critical ecosystems and promoting why we are protecting it? So that's kind of why we're here. That's why we care. So with that, talk a little bit about eastern hemlock. Eastern hemlock is why we are all here tonight, but it's also one of the very few native evergreen trees that we have in Ohio. We have a lot of species that are widely planted, but not many native species to the state. Eastern hemlock is kind of a holdover. You don't find it very often. You find it in those cool, rocky gorges where the climate's a little bit different than the rest of the state. Typically, it's more northern species, cooler climates anyway. So we don't find it widely in the state, but where we do find it, it's very important. And that's why we fight to protect these ecosystems. It's also a beautiful forest. How many of you have hiked in a hemlock forest? The beauty is unsurpassed, right? You have these cathedral-like trees, cool shaded understories. You can see forever, and it's just peaceful. They dim the noise, they dim the lights, and create this beautiful area that you can recreate in. They're also foundation species. They create the ecosystem that they grow in. They produce the shade, they produce the humidity, they cool the environment around them, and they provide habitat for a lot of different wildlife as well as vegetative species in these areas. And they have really good economic value as well as ecological value. So if you think about Ohio, the #1 tourist destination is the Hocking Hills. What does the Hocking Hills have? Hemlocks and rocks. You get rid of one of those, you change the entire features, and you change the local economy, you change the tourism, and you change the environment. So it's a really important species that we work with and try to protect. But as we all know, it's also a species that has its own threats. So we're dealing with these threats in Ohio to try to protect this resource. We have the invasive ones that have been mentioned here, so hemlock woolly adelgid, elongate hemlock scale. We have a number of different fungal diseases, Rosalenia needlecast, Fibrella needlecast, others that are attacking it. And then we have our native white-tailed deer. Turns out hemlock's kind of like candy to them. And so in areas where we do have healthy hemlocks, the deer are eating them and we have problems with regeneration. So we have all of these threats that are facing this ecosystem, and we're working to try to protect it. The good news is there is hope. Not something we can say a lot in forest health, unfortunately. We have a new invasive insect, and it's kind of, oh no, what are we gonna do? With hemlock, we do have management strategies. We can work to protect this species and do it well. And so it's something that, while yes, it is kind of a doomsday prediction, we can go out and do something about it. We can actively protect this ecosystem and do it for the long term. So that's what we are working on, is trying to protect these forests for us, but also for future generations. So working in some of these management strategies in areas where hemlocks are critical helps us protect the ecosystem, the economic value, and tourism even in these areas. Tonight, you're going to hear a lot about the efforts that are being made. They're being made across the state in all different land uses, and they're really effective. So we are working to protect these areas with a whole range of partners. I'm sure you guys saw multiple slides of logos of organizations that are working on this project. It's not a one group can do it all. So let's work together and protect these across the state. So we are working on collaboration. We are working with a task force of different organizations and groups across the state to actually move this forward and have achievable, measurable, long-lasting results. The Division of Forestry has led efforts to develop an ODNR state lands hemlock conservation plan. While this plan is focused on our state-operated lands, like our state forests, state parks, natural areas, and preserves, it serves as a template for other agencies, organizations, or landowners who want to do the same. So it outlines the importance of hemlock, where our critical areas are, where our highest priority hemlock forests are, and then what steps we are going to take to make sure that resource is there in the future. So this is available online if you're interested. I believe Tom also left a sample copy out on the registration table, so if you want to take a look at it tonight, you can do that. But it's a way to help identify our forest resources, as well as the management strategies we need to protect them. So not always good news when we have insects and diseases attacking our woods, but in this case, again, we have hope. So we have all of these different partners and organizations working to protect this resource, which means we should have really good results for a long time to come. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Tom Macy.
All right, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everyone for being here. My name's Tom Macy. I'm with ODNR Division of Forestry. I manage our forest health program, and that was a really great intro, and I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the things Stephanie touched on, get a little bit more depth on some of those things, and but a lot to cover and not a lot of time to cover it, so I'll jump right in. So yeah, eastern hemlock, as Stephanie mentioned, is a native evergreen species to Ohio. It is one of the largest tree species in eastern North America, one of the longest lived and most shade tolerant tree species in this part of the world. So, you know, ultimately can reach heights over 150, even up to 150 feet tall. Some of the things to look for with eastern hemlock identification, it's got pretty short, small needles, about a ½ inch in length. This is the mature bark. Also has pretty small cones, less than 1 inch in length here. But it's also planted within and outside of its native range too. So you'll see it in landscapes and yards as a specimen tree, sometimes planted in rows and sheared into a hedge like that. But you know, where it grows natively, it's considered a climax forest species. So at the end of natural succession, where hemlock occurs, it's sort of that late successional species. So it can really self-perpetuate its own forest type. So you'll get eastern hemlock seedlings regenerating beneath mature hemlock trees and sort of reaching that end of succession state there. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's extremely shade tolerant, and this tree can grow very slowly. So these brochures are out there. If you haven't grabbed one, feel free to get one. Just talks a little bit more about eastern hemlock and how interesting of a species it is. So, you know, a lot of trees just can't withstand that heavy shade in a forest understory like hemlock can. They can grow extremely slowly, just waiting for a gap in the canopy to take advantage of that light, where a lot of other trees wouldn't persist and they'd die. So in this brochure, it highlights a cross-section of an eastern hemlock tree trunk of a tree that was growing near Old Man's Cave in the Hocking Hills that died and was cut down for safety reasons for hikers nearby. But counting the growth rings, this tree was at least 288 years old. So really amazing. There's you know, evidence that they can survive for more than 800 years. So pretty incredible tree. This is the native range of eastern hemlock, really largely Appalachian and Great Lakes type distribution there. But throughout its range, it isn't evenly distributed. So looking specifically at Ohio, this map in the green kind of shows where the concentrations of eastern hemlock forests are. So the kind of the largest concentration is centered here in the Hocking Hills in Hocking County. And kind of highlighting some of the ODNR properties in those areas, so Hocking Hills State Park and State Forest, but also quite a bit in Jackson County. Lake Catherine State Nature Preserve is there, also up at Mohican State Park. Now this map does a pretty good job of where there's pretty large pure stands of eastern hemlock, but there's certainly quite a bit of scattered eastern hemlock in the eastern half of the state. Definitely up in northeastern Ohio, which probably doesn't show up really well on this map, where it's more confined to those stream valleys and sort of scattered with deciduous hardwood forest. So as Stephanie mentioned, you know, eastern hemlock is a foundation species, which means it really regulates the ecosystem processes of the community. And it does that through the dense shade that it creates. It actually in the wintertime, it can be warmer relative to adjacent deciduous hardwood forests. In the summertime, it's cooler. That goes for air temperature as well as stream temperature flowing through that forest. The leaf litter creates an acidic soil condition. The woody debris is slow to decompose, so it really influences that structural habitat. And so it's critical for a lot of different species, both plants and animals and fungi and others. So there's some wildflower species that are pretty dependent on that hemlock forest type. Hemlock varnish shelf is a really interesting fungus that only grows on dead hemlock wood. And then there's a whole pretty big list of bird species that really need that hemlock forest for breeding habitat. So warblers and other songbirds that are pretty closely tied to hemlock forests. And as Stephanie mentioned too, they're just beautiful forests to be in. So, the wood or lumber value of eastern hemlock is not particularly high, but it's really the visitation and tourism that draws folks, and the people that come and recreate in hemlock forests are obviously a economic driver in those often rural communities in Ohio. So it is important in that way. So Hocking Hills State Park, Lake Catherine State Nature Preserve, which looks a lot like the Hocking Hills, has a similar feel to it. And this is also Jackson County near Lake Catherine at Cantor's K4H Camp, just some spectacular forests and cliffs and waterfalls there. So without the hemlocks, you'd have a very different feel, I think, to these areas. So important to protect them there. So hemlock woolly adelgid is definitely a major threat to eastern hemlock that we're starting to show up in Ohio more and more. It's a tiny insect that forms sort of a white cottony mass over its body, and you can see that here in this photo. They attach to the base of the needle along the twig. That woolly mass is up to 1/8 of an inch in diameter, most visible in the fall through the winter and into the spring, not so much in the midsummer months. It's native to Asia as well as the Pacific Northwest, although we know through some molecular work that the hemlock woolly adelgid that we have here in eastern North America is the southern Japan biotype of HWA. So it was introduced from southern Japan, probably on ornamental Asian hemlocks that were imported to North America. First documented in North America in the 1950s in Virginia, and has spread since then. And the way it moves around, so it's a tiny insect that doesn't move a whole lot, but it can be blown in wind from tree to tree. But in the springtime, right when they hatch from the egg, the first nymph stage is able to crawl. It's called the crawler stage. But there could be millions of these tiny crawlers in a single hemlock tree. And as birds are migrating and moving through hemlock trees, they can pick up the crawlers and move them to new areas. So it's moving on birds and wildlife. And of course, human movement of infested hemlocks for landscape plants, that's been a documented method that this insect can get introduced to new areas too. So what damage does hemlock woolly adelgid do? The feeding that they do on the trees extracts carbohydrate reserves. So the tree, eventually you get needle discoloration, needle loss from the tree, and branch dieback, and a gradual decline, and eventually tree mortality. So one thing that really can slow hemlock woolly adelgid down are really cold winter temperatures. So for that reason, generally, the farther south you go, the faster hemlocks decline and die from HWA infestation compared to more northern locations where those cold winter temperatures will set the HWA population back every year. So, in the southern Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains, hemlocks can die in as little as 3 to 4 years, whereas you get farther north into New England, and there's trees that have been infested for probably a couple decades and are still alive. Their health is certainly affected, but they're not killed yet. So we think it'll be a pretty slow decline of trees here in Ohio, possibly 10 years or more for trees to be killed. But there's a number of factors that play into that. So here's where HWA occurs and is known to be at this point. So really throughout probably about half the native range of eastern hemlock at this point, these yellow counties are newly found infestations as of 2012. So a little bit more recent map, and just looking specifically at Ohio, we're up to, I think, 21 counties where we found native eastern hemlock stands infested with HWA. Also want to mention elongate hemlock scale. This is another insect pest that is threatening eastern hemlock. This is an armored scale insect. So it's a tiny insect, somewhat related to hemlock woolly adelgid, but they feed more out on the needle itself, on the underside of the needle, and they form this kind of hard, waxy covering over their body. This insect's native to Japan. It's established in the mid-Atlantic states as well as the Northeast, and is also established in some parts of northeastern Ohio in native hemlock forests. And it causes similar damage to hemlock woolly adelgid. So I'm borrowing this slide from Stephanie, Hope for Hemlock Health. So, here in Ohio, we have the benefit of years of experience managing hemlock woolly adelgid and some of these hemlock pests in other states that have had it for much longer than we have. So there are some really great tools that have been developed that we have that we can use now. We're trying our best to do integrated pest management, where we're taking advantage of all these different tools at our disposal. The best rapid response measure that we have currently to keep hemlocks healthy and keep them alive are chemical insecticide treatments on an individual tree treatment basis. And these are mostly systemic insecticides that, we're treating the trunk or the roots of the tree that chemical's moved up into the foliage. With the chemical that we're using to control HWA, it's pretty efficient. With a single treatment of a tree, the tree can be protected from HWA for up to 7 years. So we're not having to treat the tree every single year. The chemical is relatively inexpensive, as low as 5 cents per diameter inch of trunk of the tree. They're relatively easy to apply to the tree as well. So we can get a lot of trees treated and protected. We're doing that actively on state lands. We've got folks here in the room that are current and former members of the Hemlock Conservation Crew. Can you folks raise your hand if you're involved with that? There's some here, over here. Yep. So they're doing a lot of great work on the ground and have been doing awesome stuff. So in addition to the chemical treatments, there are some approved biological controls for hemlock woolly adelgid. There's a fly species, it's called a silver fly here, whose larvae feed on HWA. There's also predator beetles. So this is a species of Laricobius beetle that both the adults and the larvae feed on HWA as well. So we're pursuing that as well. We haven't had a lot of success in getting those established here yet in Ohio, but we are pursuing that. There are other options too. So cultural methods, different ways we can manipulate a forest stand that make hemlocks healthier, that research is showing. And then, of course, the longest term strategy is host resistance. So can we find hemlocks out there that have some sort of natural tolerance or resistance to these insect pests? And can we propagate and find and propagate those trees for restoration in the future? So all that work is underway. And finally, just to wrap up, we need as much help as we can get. Folks out there amongst hemlock trees, if they can keep an eye out for these pests, that's great. And, suspected findings can be reported through this Great Lakes Early Detection Network app. It's a great free smartphone app for reporting any and all invasive species. Our website, ohiodnr.gov/HWA, has a reporting page where you can report possible sightings of hemlock woolly adelgid, or just give us a call at the ODNR Division of Forestry, and we'd be happy to follow up on that. So we're going to hear a lot more about great work going on, specifically in northeastern Ohio. So I'll turn it over next to Connie.
My My name is Barbara Andreas, and unlike the other presentations that are going to follow mine, I represent the private landowner dealing with hemlock woolly adelgid. We have no staff, no ATVs, no volunteers to help us locate and treat hemlock woolly adelgid. We are on our own. My husband, Dennis Cook, and I live on 86 acres of land located about 3 miles from Old Man's Cave in Hocking County. Our land is a rectangle that extends from a county road to State Route 664, and our eastern neighbor is Hocking State Forest. Slightly less than 17%, excuse me, or about 15 acres of our land has thick groves of hemlocks. In addition, there are randomly scattered hemlocks throughout the remaining acreage. Our dominant infestation is associated with the south to north running sandstone ravine, whose slopes and rims are dominated with hemlock. Since the initial infestation, several isolated trees have also shown signs of HWA. In December of 2017, hemlock woolly adelgid was found on our property. The first person I contacted was Tom Macy, and Tom, after several discussions, sent me electronically 2 documents. One was the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Eastern Hemlock Conservation Plan, and the second one was the optimized insecticide dosage of hemlock woolly adelgid control, published by the University of Georgia. I also contacted a local group that we have in Hocking County that I had heard was interested in hemlock woolly adelgids. That organization was the Hocking Hills Conservation Association. I found that they were more, at that time, were interested in letting people know about the presence of hemlock woolly adelgid. However, what I needed was hand-holding. I needed someone who would help me learn about the hemlock woolly adelgid and possibly eradication or control. I then turned to Crane Hollow Preserve, which is our neighbor to the north, and Joe Moosberger, who is the assistant manager of Crane Hollow, and one of their interns came and helped us do the initial survey around that ravine that I mentioned. Joe also gave us advice on the first treatments that we did on our land. In 2018, we found it in December of 2017, and in 2018, 34 trees were identified, infested trees were identified. All but 8 of those were treated. The following year, the 8 trees from 2018, an additional 12 were treated. By 2022, 66 trees had been treated. And I was looking at the map that you had, Tom, and around 2022, we had a great expansion of hemlock woolly adelgids on our land. 37 trees were treated. More were identified as infected but left untreated. By the end of 2023, 148 trees had been treated. Each February, Denny and I began surveying the property starting in the southwest corner where the hemlocks are just randomly scattered. When we come to a tree, we pull the branches down on as far as we can reach up and examine for the presence of hemlock woolly adelgid. We carry with us rolls of white flagging tape. If we find hemlock woolly adelgid, we tie a piece of white flagging tape on that branch. We put a piece of flagging tape around the trunk of the tree, and then we also just hang a bunch of flags from the trees to help us locate it when we go out for treatment. It takes about 3 to 4 days to survey all 86 acres. And while we're doing that annual survey, we also look at previously treated trees. We pull the branches down and see if we see any signs of reinfestation. In April, treatment of newly infected trees begins. In a 5-gallon plastic bucket, we carry all the equipment necessary for our treatment. It includes a jar of Bayer's Cortect, I'm going to pronounce this poorly, imidacloprid tablets, a diameter of breast-height tape, nails, aluminum tags that are pre-numbered. We carry a hammer, nails, a trowel, cans of white spray paint, a list of previously infected trees, and a clipboard, paper, and marker. The diameter of each, the diameter at breast height of each infested tree is measured. That number, the DBH, relates to how many tablets we're going to have to use to treat that tree. That Tom provided us with a chart that relates the DBH to the number of tablets that we need to take. We use the Cortec method, the tablet method, because from where we live, our hemlock trees are located very far down slope, and it's simply too difficult to carry water. So we choose to use the Cortec method. Cortec may be purchased from Amazon at a cost of $125 per 250 trees. 250 tablets. According to the EPA, we are allowed to use 362 tablets per acre. A tree with a diameter at breast height of 33 inches, which is the largest on our land, requires 65 tablets. So it's pretty easy to get to 362 in 1 year. And that is the reason why some trees don't get treated the first year that we find the infestation. Each year we treat the largest trees first, and the reason for that is that those trees are the seed source for future generations. But as Stephanie mentioned, we don't find very young hemlocks in our forests because of all the deer browsing that goes on. To find a hemlock tree less than 5 feet in height is almost impossible. So when treatment begins, we clean the leaves and organic matter away from the base of the tree. Using a trowel, we dig holes in a circle around the base, and we drop in the Cortec tablets and cover them with soil. We put a numbered aluminum tag on the tree. We use the white can of spray paint and put a circle at the underneath that tag at the base of the tree. And we record the tree number and the location. Treatment is usually finished in a day. Treatment with Cortec is supposed to last 5 to 7 years, and thus far we have seen no reinfestation of trees that we have treated. Making private landowners aware of the presence and devastation of hemlock woolly adelgid is really important. One only has to go to the Smoky Mountains, and I'm so glad you included that slide showing the devastation of hemlock woolly adelgid on trees that have been left untreated. However, as private landowners, we need help getting started on treatment. The Hocking Hills Conservation Association is making great strides not only now to let people know about the presence of hemlock woolly adelgids, but they're also providing demonstrations on what the different methods are to treat it. My suggestion is that a helpline be established and that there is a group of volunteers who are willing to go out and hold that hand and help those people get started, help me get started. If you were to walk our 86 acres, it would be hard to find garlic mustard or a shrub of autumn olive. Japanese stiltgrass is kept out of the best forests. We hand pull it and we spray it. I feel that we can control most of the invasive species, save hemlock woolly adelgid. We will never win that battle, but our hope is that we can save as many trees as possible. Thank you.
I'm Connie Hausman. I'm the Senior Conservation Science Manager at Cleveland Metroparks. I work in the Division of Natural Resources, and I would be pleased to hire Barb and Denny Cook to join us in any of our surveys and treatments, because that is a tremendous amount of dedication and commitment that it takes for a private landowner, and we commend your efforts on that. For myself, I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what it takes from a park district's perspective to understand the range and extent of our hemlock stands and the impacts of these various pest species. To remind everybody down here in Columbus, where Cleveland is, Cleveland Metroparks is predominantly in Cuyahoga County. We have about 25,000 acres. We're known as the Emerald Necklace, so we're around downtown urban and even within Cleveland proper. But we own property in 6 total counties in Northeast Ohio. Of our 25,000 acres, about 1,000 acres are in our hemlock hardwood forests. So Tom had shared a map with the range and extents and the density of hemlock across Ohio, and it's scattered throughout Northeast Ohio. So we have about, like I said, 1,000 acres that we monitor. As such, for today, I'm going to walk through sort of what it takes from our perspective to understand the range and the extent of hemlock through our mapping efforts, to understand the condition, the health and overall condition of our hemlocks, and the influence and early pest detection of either hemlock woolly adelgid or elongate hemlock scale. And then again, informing how we adapt our rapid treatment methods, and then to also understand from a research perspective the effectiveness monitoring of said treatments. I'll back up real quick here since I have this little highlighter. Most of where I'm going to be sharing you some maps is in the northeast corner of Cuyahoga County into Lake County as our North Chagrin, South Chagrin, and Bedford reservations. So that's these maps here. In our North Chagrin Reservation, everything you see here in purple, that is the range and extent of our eastern hemlock. It's about 379 acres. This is the range extent through Bedford, South Chagrin. We represent the range of hemlock where it's the glaciated Allegheny Plateau, so the range and distribution of our hemlocks is even more narrow than what you have in southern Ohio, restricted to those cold, steep ravines. It's speckled and scattered sporadically throughout the county, but these are where we have the most and most dense stands. The early detection side for us, we started doing some volunteer surveys. So even from a staff limitation and capacity, we partner with various Metroparks volunteers to do some forest health inventory and some surveys. That started back in 2015. So knowing that pests like hemlock woolly adelgid were at our doorstep, it was really important for us to try to understand where do we have hemlock. Let's get an early detection of this impact. And so I have both up here. Tom mentioned both of these already. For us in Northeast Ohio, a lot of what we end up focusing the most on is elongate hemlock scale. It was first detected in that Northeast reservation, North Chagrin Reservation, in 2018. So we've been surveying for 3 years to try to get that early detection. And then again, we found hemlock woolly adelgid in North Chagrin just last year in May of 2022. And here you can see, again, that armored scale of the elongate hemlock scale. So this took us into a little bit more focused inventory beyond just general survey for the distribution of this pest. You can see this is our North Chagrin Reservation, and that's broken up here into 1 meter grids. And each of those 1 meter grids was further surveyed and inventoried for the size and distribution of eastern hemlock. And each point then was assigned an elongate hemlock severity rank. And so white dots are no EHS, and the orange to red dots are higher, more severe locations of that elongate hemlock scale. So when we do this information, we take the range extent of hemlocks, we take the severity ranking, and then we take other data that we have across the landscape to understand the overall health of our particular forest, so we can set stand prioritization for where we're going to do this treatment. Because as Barb mentioned, we're never going to be able to get to all of them. So wherever we can allocate that time and resource, we need to do so strategically. So what we do here for prioritizing our stands is we take, like I said, all that additional information, the hemlocks, the severity, and we layer on what's called our natural resource value index. So that's the range of color blobs that you see in the back. Those are sub-watershed delineations, and they're different colors because they represent different quality. So the darker blue, lighter blue areas are our higher quality sub-watersheds. The data that we have going into that are various vegetation, long-term monitoring plots, long-term primary headwater stream data, macroinvertebrates, birds, et cetera, mammals, birds, insects, you name it. anything that we have on the landscape that we can understand a high value conservation resource value goes into understanding where we should identify those priority stands. And so as such, you can see, up in here we have this underlayer of blue, scattered here with some orange and red dots, and this hemlock stand into the north. We know this is our Whispering Woods forest. It is a high-value conservation area and thus an example of one of our priority stands. And that leads me to a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, and Derrick Cooper is going to come up next to be able to expand on this a little bit more. But starting in 2021, we worked on a grant together trying to identify and treat these hemlocks in these priority stands. So again, this is that Whispering Woods area here that was treated in 2021. In total, after 2 years, we've treated over 1,000 trees, 1,027 trees. 52-acre blocks in total were treated. However, there are still trees within some of those blocks that, as Barb mentioned, you get to a per acre limit of application. And so you treat the bigger trees first, and you do the best you can to try to chip away at all of those particular priorities. So you can see that there are 5 treatment areas of 5 priority stands that were identified across the 2 years in which we did some of these treatments. Now, from our perspective, we're treating predominantly all elongate hemlock scale. That's what everything that you're seeing here is. Hemlock woolly adelgid was only found for the first time on just a handful of trees in 2022, just last year. So all of our treatment focuses on elongate hemlock scale. And so since that's a little bit different from what the state has to do in the Hocking region, focusing on hemlock woolly adelgid, we were very curious to know how the imidacloprid treatment that focuses on HWA is different from the dinoteffurin product, which is what we have to use for elongate hemlock scale. So we did an effective monitoring project here. In 2021, we identified 64 trees that were going to be treated in May, June of 2021. There was a variety of different application methods. They were either basal bark treatment or trunk injections. And we took a handful of trees for each. We took the most severe tree in that particular treatment block, and we found the most severe branch to be able to identify, track, and monitor. So then, very similar to Barb, we put little flagging tape on it so we can track the treatment and the success of new growth in the establishment of elongate hemlock scale. So in general, this is what that looks like. This is part of the bough of the branch that was being treated in May of 2019. It was severe with elongate hemlock scale, and here you can see 3 new bud growths. So because this is an armored scaled insect, it doesn't fall off. Once you've treated it, you don't necessarily know if you were effective because the condition of the overall tree does not improve. And so we look to colonization. We look to the new growth to make sure that none of this armored scale insects have colonized the new growth. So here you can see in September the lengthening of each of these new buds to be able to look for colonization. And we did that over the course of 2 years. And this is what that data looks like. This first bar graph here on the left, this shows the overall severity rating. Yellow is most severe, and then moderate, low, and very low of all of the trees that were being treated under this experimental project. And then we came back in September, 4 months later, to look at any of the colonization on that new growth. And you can see we had a remarkable difference in the fact that there was, a higher proportion of trees that did not have any colonization. And after 2 growing seasons, that same pattern holds true, which is important because the dinoteffurin tends to have only 1 year's worth of efficacy. So we can see that we're seeing a little bit longer stretch in some of that treatment, which is important because I'm coming back to this particular map. This is the view of elongate hemlock scale in 2020, and this is the same view in 2022. So very quickly, this particular insect has spread rapidly. And the severity rankings have all increased, and we have additional reservations. So shifting or identifying our management focus is very adaptive. So this is when we first detected elongate hemlock scale in 18, woolly adelgid in 22. Because of this rapid change and shift in severity rankings, we have to constantly monitor track our treatment effectiveness, adjust our stand prioritization, and that's an iterative process, and it requires a lot of time on the ground from either a park system or even a homeowner. Thank you very much, and with that, I'll punt it over to Derrick.
All right. Hello. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Derrick Cooper. I am the Grand River Restoration Coordinator, and I work with the Nature Conservancy. Can I get a show of hands of how many people actually know who the Nature Conservancy is? Solid. All right. I won't go through that explanation then. So, Northeast Ohio, where I'm based out of, my office is currently in Ashtabula County, which you can see in the far, far northeast corner. We work collaboratively with a large network of partners in Northeast Ohio to tackle large regional conservation issues. And one of the big ones that came to us was Hemlock woolly adelgid. And this all kind of started back in 2017 when HWA first showed up at our doorstep at that Lake County, Geauga County border. Partners and TNC got together and started to discuss how they wanted to approach this topic. We started to get really concerned. We didn't really know what to do and how we were going to tackle it. And so we set out together and we pursued a Forest Service grant through JLRI funding to acquire funds to go after survey and treatment response in the area. This was a great partnership. We had local partners, private entities that came together, pooled resources, and to share their efforts across the area to help each and every partner out. And the main goal was we needed to survey the whole region of Northeast Ohio because we did not know the extent of our problem. We knew that we had it in a few areas, but we have 7 counties that encompass Northeast Ohio in the Great Lakes watershed that hemlock can occur in. So we wanted to touch down everywhere and really figure out what the distribution of our pest was and then start to react. So for the project, we had to complete deliverables because it's a grant project, so we were legally bound. So we decided that we were going to go for 1,000 acres of survey and 600 acres of treatment, and then there's 4 presentation outreach events that we had to do, which you all are participating in right now, so thank you. And so what we've done so far is we blew the survey acreage out of the water. Partners really came to the table. They brought a lot of volunteer efforts, and TNC themselves got out and did a lot of survey work across the region, just getting to little hole-in-the-wall preserves all over the area, starting to really surveying for this pest. What we actually found, which was surprising to us, is that the pest issue was not as widespread as we had thought. We thought it was going to be everywhere. We were thinking doomsday scenario. What we actually found is it was actually confined to most of the areas that we already knew where it was. That wasn't the case by where we're standing at today, because this grant started back around 2019. So where we're at today is a totally different story. But so we were actually kind of in a situation where we actually didn't have acres to treat, and we had this deliverable we had to meet. We actually had a staff member who's actually here who decided to go for a hike in Youngstown, of all places, and found a population of HWA that was undetected. Youngstown is outside the Great Lakes watershed, but we were kind of in a pinch, and we asked the Forest Service, and they said, go for it. And so we actually helped out Youngstown, Mill Creek Metroparks, on top of helping our partners here in the area. By the end of the project, which is coming up, we've increased the amount of infested areas with both pests pretty quickly. And one of the other big things I want to note that we also have a partner that didn't really want to participate in any chemical treatments. And through the partnership with the Division of Forestry, we were actually able to leverage that relationship, and we actually got biocontrols released at one of the parks up in Summit County to kind of accommodate that situation. So the project actually had benefits that we weren't even expecting, which has been tremendous. So this kind of give you a highlight of what some of that work looks like. You know, you have, that's what it looks like from our perspective. A person out with a backpack sprayer doing precise calculations to figure out how much chemical they need to use and applying it to the trunk of the tree. The map you see to the side is kind of, this is actually North Chagrin Reservation that is part of Cleveland Metroparks. And so unlike Connie's, where it was more of the survey and where you're looking at where the infestations are and how dense, this is actually looking at the same 1 acre grid blocks, but now you're starting to see all the treatments. And so this is just our year 1 treatment that we did for Cleveland Metroparks. And those acres are important because we use those acre blocks in our GPS unit to navigate and decide to keep track of how much chemical we're using, because we do have tight per acre limits. In some cases, you might treat 8 trees and then you're done in that acre block. And so we navigate inside these acre blocks until we hit our per acre limit, and then we move. And so some of the obstacles going forward with this work are our grant is coming to an end. So we will no longer have this external funding source that has been fueling this rapid response project that we have. Once that ends, we're going to have to start looking at future funding sources and get kind of creative in how we're going to tackle some of this very intense issue that we have. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, and Connie kind of mentioned, is for the elongated hemlock scale, we're using a chemical product called dinotefrin. That product can cost upward about where we're going to work and how we're going to work. And resources are why the Nature Conservancy was really happy to help, because we do have trained staff to do this kind of work, and we can collaborate across boundaries very easily. And that's one of the real big reasons why this project is something that's important to us, because we have the ability to help these partners with these limited resources. And we're hoping to continue to do so into the future. So if anyone has any questions, please take down my contact information and shoot me an email. And I believe I'm supposed to go sit in the chair. The maroon chair. Ooh.
Don't step off the back. So it looks like this moderated session is going to be pretty quick. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Dave Apsley. I'm recently retired from Ohio State University Extension, and I've been involved with some of the hemlock woolly adelgid efforts since about 2012. I want to relay a really quick experience with hemlock woolly adelgid to start this off, and I think it'll hopefully spur some conversation. But back in 2012, and Heather's in the room, she introduced us to a gentleman in the Smokies named Jesse Webster. Jesse dealt with hemlock woolly adelgid in the Smoky Mountains, and frankly, it was pretty depressing. You saw some of the pictures. Well, we thought we were being really proactive in 2012, right, Stephanie? And we brought Jesse up to the Hocking Hills, and you know, I think he came up thinking, what are we going to find in Ohio that even could come close to the Great Smoky Mountains? And we took him to Ash Cave one early morning, and we standing there by one of those huge hemlocks at Ash Cave. He said, you guys have a really good chance of saving these hemlocks. And I'm kind of baffled because it was pretty negative in the Smokies at the time. So my first question to the group is, why do we have a better chance of saving these hemlocks here in Ohio than they did in the Smokies? And I think some of you addressed it slightly, but any thoughts on that?
Take a first stab. Well, I think one difference is just the amount of hemlock we have to work with. Don't have quite the level of hemlock as the Smoky Mountains do. I think there's probably more hemlock acreage forest in the Smoky Mountains than there is in the entire state of Ohio. So, you know, I think we are in a good position to probably be able to protect a higher percentage of our hemlock forest versus a place like that.
We also got started early. We saw what happened in the South, and so that gave us a chance to get a heads up.
One time up here.
I agree with them.
One other piece is it's good to be last or late in the game in some things. So we got to learn from their experiences and their treatments and their research. So thanks for answers on that one. I have to start out because I live in Jackson County, Ohio. And the title of the program was From the Cleveland Metroparks to Hocking Hills. And I think we need to add and beyond, right? So I'm curious what the status of Hemlock woolly adelgid is in the Rock Run area, Jackson County, which is the second highest concentration of hemlock in Ohio.
Yeah, it's we've been monitoring that closely with our staff and working along with Division of Natural Areas and Preserves, Lake Catherine State Nature Preserve, and some other properties down there. And it's becoming pretty well established. I think in most of the hemlock stands in Jackson County, HWA is probably going to be there. But like most of the state, even though it's well established there in Jackson County, the hemlocks still are pretty healthy. So I think we're still early in the game and can really get a lot of it protected and have a good shot at keeping a lot of that hemlock resource there.
Thank you.
Because it is well established there, that is one of the top priority places right now for us trying to establish biological controls, because it's kind of a hare and the lynx relationship. You've got to have the prey there for the predators to get established. So that's one thing we're pursuing in that area too.
Great, thanks, Tom. Got a question for Barbara. How do we get more Barbaras out there on the landscape? Early on, I was involved with the Hocking Hills efforts, and we were trying to reach out to woodland owners. And it seems like most of these invasive pest problems, people don't call you. I have a long career in extension. You don't get calls until it's too late, usually, with forest health issues. So how do we get more landowners who are more proactive, like Barbara has been? And then the next question for you, Barbara, is you've mentioned some of it, but what resources do you need as a woodland owner? And I think you touched on that, so we may not need to go too deep in that one. But
I am who I am because I grew up at a farm, and my dad hated to see what we call wild mustard, Barbaria vulgaris, in his fields. And so before I even went to school, I started pulling yellow mustard out of the fields. But also I taught ecology courses, and I just know the results of allowing any kind of invasive to get a head start. I just noticed in Hocking County that the grass miscanthus, I think it's maybe called fountain grass, is starting to grow everywhere along our roadsides. And so I'm thinking, when's that going to come on the property? I don't know how. I think if we had a group of volunteers who'd be willing to go and help other people get started, it would be a good way. I can always use more bodies surveying trees.
And then a question for folks that are involved in either more the public lands and on private lands. What other resources do we need statewide to really address hemlock woolly adelgid and longate hemlock scale? It seems like, in my mind, there's some things that we could really ramp up, but we've always got such limited resources. So.
Yeah, so money, Barb actually whispered it even in my ear, because it is clearly a limiting factor, whether or not it's to be able to support time and effort for surveying and understanding the range of impact and extent, for treatment. If we hope to have those wins, and clearly we have the opportunity, we have the landscape, we have the early communication and early detection, but that money goes a long way for sure.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think, with the work at hand, it's going to take a lot of bodies. We need a lot of people, and we need to increase our labor force in the natural resources field in order to really do this at scale. No pun intended. What was the other thing I was thinking? But I think if we can get more access to more federal funds, I think that would be a really big help. Also, we need to find an avenue for private landowners to access these fundings, whether it's through EQIP or some funding source like that. I think that's going to be really important for the long-term management.
these communications go a long way. Forums like this, the outreach, the education, between the academic institutions to your students, to the homeowners when you go home for Christmas break, your neighbors, et cetera. Anytime we can have this type of dialogue and increase awareness goes a long way. People don't even know that they need, that they should care because they don't even know what the problems on the landscape. And so if we can make it a more common part of our conversation, that goes a long way.
Derrick brought up an acronym, EQIP. How many folks know what EQIP is? Okay, that's a lot of hands in the room, but it's Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Tom, what's the status of that with Hemlock-Woolly Adelgid and treatments?
Yeah, us here in Ohio and other states have been, interested in adding hemlock treatments as a practice under EQIP, and it hasn't happened yet, but I think we've been talking with NRCS, and I think there are other programs that at least as a pilot program we could try to roll out. So we're hopefully going to make some progress on that and maybe start to use some of those programs. It won't be fully in EQIP, but maybe it'll lead to that eventually. So working on it.
And I think we're running short on time, but I did want to ask just kind of an update on status of biocontrols. What have we tried? Where are we? Have we recovered any of those biocontrols?
Yeah, we've been working with the biological controls and doing releases of both the Laricobius beetles and more recently the silverflies in a few different parts of the state. But we haven't had a lot of success yet at getting them established. I think part of the problem could be that where we're releasing them, there's not a super high level of HWA there for the biocontrols to persist on. So it may just be a matter of time before they start to take hold. But yeah, in other states, they're having a lot of success getting them established. So I'm hoping it'll just take some time. But yeah, we're viewing that as a much longer term sort of sustainable way to keep the pest population down. And in the more short term, we have the chemical treatments to keep those hemlocks there.
And since I'm retired, I can add my comments and thoughts on this. Frankly, I think Ohio is behind the game on us, mainly because we're dependent on other states to get biocontrols. We don't have anybody producing or rearing these biocontrols in Ohio, so we're waiting for other states' excess. And so that's a challenge, I think, especially at this university and other places to be creative and find ways that we can rear these, especially the insect biocontrols here locally. So, because I think where they've had the most success is where they just keep putting the biocontrols out there. And the most successful example early on was a golf course in North Carolina, Grandfather Mountain, where they were dedicated to it for decades and went out to the Pacific Northwest, collected biocontrols and brought them back and did it and did it and did it. And in 2013 or 12, we went down and were able to bring some of the first ones to Ohio from a private operation. So if you have any influence on anybody who can help with that, I really highly recommend pushing that, because I think that is our long-term solution to the problem. The insecticides, we just can't continue to sustain that. So just my 2 cents worth. Joe, are we pretty much ready to move on?
Yeah, we have some questions coming in from the YouTube audience, so I might switch over to that. And then if anyone has a question here in the room, just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. But let me ask two questions to the panel from people watching online right now. So someone with the name PDX Buckeye asked the question, this is probably for Tom, but any can answer. Does the division operate any nurseries that propagate seedlings for the general public?
Currently, no. We did at one time, but we had several nurseries in the past, but the last one closed down, I believe, in 2008. There is some interest in, we still own some of the properties where we had seedling nurseries. There is interest in trying to get one of them reopened again, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'm hopeful maybe at some point in the near future we'll be able to produce seedlings again.
Thank you. And Joseph Wildy asks, the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, updated its plant hardiness map this year. What effects are the warmer average temperatures expected to have on hemlocks?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, as far as the insect pests go, that's bad news because, as we know, for hemlock woolly adelgid at least, they have greater survival with warmer winters. So that's not a good thing for hemlocks when you have higher success of the insect pests.
Hemlock also kind of facilitate their own climate. And so in the ravines, at least in the northern part of the state where we have, thank you, where we have Cleveland winters, we'll call it, you know, we're averaging more snow in the northeast part of the state than any other part of Ohio. And so these colder temperatures do allow us uniquely in northeast Ohio to have a little bit better survivability than southern Ohio in terms of the long-term projections with the adelgid. But hemlock can create a little bit more of a resilient ecosystem where it exists because it is keeping the climate kind of moderated. If we start to see decline in that canopy because the hemlocks start to die to these pests, that microclimate it's creating is gone. And that's going to be hard to get back. Then you're going to have a hard time with the reestablishment of seedlings and then the deer pressure and so on and so forth.
And unfortunately, that's just a species that is a loser in terms of modeled projections for future climate tolerance. So it is a struggle managing this particular species that's such a unique, limited in range extent for Ohio, but for the work that the U.S. Forest Service and even Ohio State in the room has done, it's one of those species that's not modeled to do very well under future climate conditions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin, and I'm a grad of the School of Environment and Natural Resources. Barbara, I have a question for you. How do you pay for the tablets to treat HWA on your property? Is that coming out of your pocket, or have you found financial resources for private landowners? And then actually a follow-up question for Stephanie, if that's allowed. Stephanie, as an NRCS liaison, are there any resources that you know of for hemlock conservation on private land?
We pay for the treatment out of our pocket. The trees mean that much to us. When I was putting this together, I realized that one tree with 33 inches in diameter cost us something like $62, you know, just to treat. And so right now, we will continue to do that. 148 trees, you know, it's only going to double and double. So at some point, we're going to start retreating trees. So I don't know where, I have no idea, Denny, where this will end. He says we'll sell something.
All right, to answer the question related to NRCS, as Tom mentioned, we are working on every possible avenue to make that available to landowners. Right now, we're actually dealing with some federal policy that restricts the use of insecticides. And so we're figuring out what the workaround is for that and what we need to do to actually get that moving. So we're looking at some trial opportunities that we might be able to showcase the benefits and the reduction in native impacts so that hopefully we can facilitate that on a wider scale. So we're working on it, but we don't have it yet.
And please raise your hand if you have a question here in the room. And when you do ask a question, try to speak as directly into the mic as you can, because there's folks watching online. A question from Logan Dunn. I think this came, Dave, when you were talking about biological controls. Logan asks, can we order these biological controls from other states? Is it available for purchase?
That's a good question. I think there might be, I think I'm aware of one private company out there that is rearing a species of beetle that's a predator of HWA for sale. But I think it's pretty pricey for a landowner to attempt to purchase them. So yeah, for now, you know, there's some cooperative agreements set up between U.S. Forest Service and state agencies and universities that are rearing these things or collecting them from the wild to get them moved around. So we're doing everything we can right now to get as many as we can and try to get them established in those areas where we think we'll have the most success. And then hopefully in the future, you know, once they become established, they'll kind of disperse on their own and move on to private land. Obviously, they don't recognize land boundaries, and we can help facilitate getting it moved around within the state too. So that's the eventual goal.
Are you doing anything about the deer problem now? You know, shooting them as pests? Or it seems like that would be the simpler thing to do.
At Cleveland Metroparks, we do have a deer management program.
Yeah, Nature Conservancy uses hunters to kind of control their deer populations inside their preserves in various parts of our state, in the state.
Okay, one question over here. That's kind of a weave around. All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Elena De Pasqua. I'm an undergrad student in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. And you guys mentioned using biocontrol and chemicals to treat the trees. And I was just wondering what the impacts of those things would have on the local environment and other ecosystems.
Well, I'll start. That is a concern anytime. Are we on? Okay. Anytime. Are we good?
I don't.
Is this better? Oh, that's way better. Anytime you use any kind of chemical control, we always are thoughtful about non-target effects. And so how the chemical is applied is important. The mode of application, the distance to certain conservation value species, setbacks from stream and riparian areas. So it's done in a method and way that tries to control as many different non-target effects as possible. We've been talking about that a lot. I mean, we did an effectiveness monitoring on the product itself for the trees. So, there's pros and cons and gains and losses. But we too have been talking about trying to figure out a little bit more targeted way that we could look at some other non-target impacts.
And I can go into a little more detail on, some of the best management practices that we're doing to ensure that this is minimizing its impact. And, some of the biggest concerns are with bees, right? Your pollinators can be affected by this chemical. And one of the biggest things we do is we avoid treating hemlock trees near species like basswood, tulip poplar, other flowering trees during that peak flower, right? So the chemical in the deciduous tree drops out of the tree at the end of the year when the foliage falls off. So if we just wait till past that flowering period, you have a low risk of affecting any pollinators. And that's one of the biggest concerns. The other thing to deal with is water, right? Aquatic insects, it's a big issue. And so we create a buffer, like Connie mentioned, of 10, 20 feet, depending on which partner we're working with. And then any trees inside that buffer, we use an injection. So we inject chemical directly into the tree to minimize any chemical that would be on the landscape. And, we chose to do basal bark applications in Northeast Ohio because we wanted to minimize the amount of chemical that was just loose in the soil, and because it can have upwards of, 9 foot of drift from the application point. And so by putting it right on the tree, you really minimize the amount of chemical that's interacting with the soil.
And also, that's a very important question. And, all we can do is make the best decision based on, the knowledge that we have. So there has been some really good research on that. And these decisions are all about trade-offs because, we'd be naive to think if we're treating these trees, the only thing we're impacting is that pest insect. So there could be, off-target effects on that tree if there's other organisms feeding on the tree. But from the research that we've seen, I think we're having very little off-target impact. And, again, it's all about trade-offs. If you don't do the treatments, what's going to happen? You're going to lose those hemlock trees and lose that habitat that all these other species depend on. So, yeah, it's a tough question. And we don't want to use insecticides forever. So we're kind of hopefully viewing it as a stopgap measure to when we can get biocontrols established or get potentially resistant hemlocks planted in that area too. So great question.
We have time for one more question, and if no one has one, Dave, our final question.
I think we've covered almost everything that I had on my list. I've been checking off. I had a longer list of questions, and the audience did a great job. But as a follow-up to your question, Tom, do you want to address the dosage rates and how that's changed based on what the labels say? Because I think that's something that people might want to hear about.
Yeah, another really great thing with some really great research that's been done on this. Again, other states have been dealing with this for years. That they found that, with the main chemical we use for HWA, imidacloprid, they've actually found, at least on the smaller diameter trees, you can go pretty well below the pesticide label recommended rate. So there's an optimized dosage that we can use, and you still get, 5 to 7 years of residual protection in that tree from a single treatment. So, that allows us to minimize costs. It also allows us to maximize the number of trees that we can protect out there. So, yeah, it's really great tool that we have available to protect hemlock trees.
Okay. All right, a round of applause for our panel. Thank you all so much. If you can hang here for just a second, I do want to conclude. There was a comment shared, Dr. Andreas, while you were speaking, and it was from Douglas Fritchell, who said, "Great that you were able to provide a private property owner's perspective. You and your husband are doing great work." So part of what tonight was about, and Jacob, if you want to turn on our slides, is acknowledging those who are going above and beyond in what they do, whether that's organizationally. Derrick, sorry, you just got blinded. Derrick's face alongside all these organizations. You need 4 presentations. I think this qualifies as 2 if you just keep your head right there. Sorry. It was to acknowledge individuals who are going above and beyond. And Dr. Andreas, we learned about your work over a year ago, and it's an honor to have you here along with the rest of the panel. So thank you all. And also want to give a shout out to the organizations that are on this slide. So if you just want to advance through them slowly, you can all see other organizations that we know are around Ohio doing great work. Good. All right. That concludes our event for tonight. Dr. Wilson, who was our MC at the very beginning, it's a night of everyone's had rotating things come up in their personal lives. Her children were in need of some short-term quick child care, so she's back at home now in the time since we've had our discussion. So I'm concluding things on behalf of Dr. Wilson, who would say, thank you for what you do. These are our certificates of appreciation. We are inspired by what you do and helping us grow as a community. So thank you very much. And you can all step down now. You don't have to stare into the light anymore. Thank you.
The spotlight.
As you're making your way out the door, a couple important announcements related to upcoming programs and our catering as well. On the back of your program, you'll see registration information for our January event. You can learn more there. And because people are starting to make your way out the room, I do want to mention the red utensils get reused. That's part of our zero waste program. So pay attention to the signage on your way out the door. Hey, will you bring up the, and don't forget your poinsettia. I have it. Hey, good to see you. I have an email I was about to send to you, but maybe I'll tell you now. I just talked, so for October 2024, there's so much interest here in doing a